My son-in-law kicked me out into the freezing snow and forced me to sell my own house. My daughter threw a heavy broken bag at my chest, shouting for me to take my trash and leave. But when I finally opened that bag, I was stunned. Inside was $650,000 and a shocking secret note. What I read inside left me breathless, and it became the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. If you are watching this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what city you are listening from. It helps me share my story with others who might be suffering in silence. Now take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you will make your blood boil. Take your trash and get out of my house. The heavy, faded black duffel bag hit me squarely in the chest. The force of it knocked the breath out of my 70-year-old lungs, and I stumbled backward, my boots slipping on the polished hardwood floor. I looked up, trying to process the hatred burning in my own daughter's eyes. Rachel stood there, her face flushed with anger, pointing a trembling finger toward the heavy oak front door. "I am not joking, Dad. Get out. Derek is bringing a very important client to view the house in 20 minutes, and we cannot have you loitering around the living room looking like a homeless person." I stood frozen in the foyer, the heavy bag slumping to the floor by my feet. Behind Rachel, lounging against the kitchen island with a smug grin on his face, was my son-in-law, Derek. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and let out a cruel little laugh. "You heard her," Harrison Derek sneered, taking a sip of his coffee. "This is $1 million listing. These buyers are looking for luxury. They are not looking for the lingering scent of old man and cheap medicine. So do us all a favor, grab your garbage and take a long walk. Do not come back until the showing is over. Actually, maybe do not come back at all." I looked from Derek to Rachel, desperately searching for a trace of the little girl I had raised. The little girl who used to hold my hand tightly when we walked through the park. But there was nothing. Only a cold, impatient glare. "Rachel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is freezing outside. The snow is coming down hard, and the wind chill is below zero. You want me to walk the streets in this weather?" "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she snapped, crossing her arms. "There is a coffee shop 3 blocks down. Buy a cheap tea and sit there. Just be out of my sight. We have a lot riding on this sale, and you are ruining the aesthetic of our home." Our home. The words echoed in my mind, twisting like a rusty knife in my gut. She called it her home. She called it their sale. But the brutal reality was something far different. As I looked around the magnificent living room with its vaulted ceilings, the custom stone fireplace, and the massive windows looking out over the mountains, my chest tightened with a grief that had nothing to do with the cold weather outside. 3 years ago, I sold everything I had. My beloved wife Diane had passed away after a long and agonizing battle with illness. It was a dark time that nearly broke me. The only thing she left behind was a substantial life insurance policy money she specifically meant for my retirement. Diane had held my hand on her deathbed and told me she wanted me to be comfortable, to rest, after 40 years of working tirelessly to provide for our family. She wanted me to travel, to read my books, and to finally have peace. But when Rachel and Derek came to me shortly after the funeral, crying about their massive debts, their failing business ventures, and begging for a fresh start, I did what any loving, foolish father would do. I sacrificed my own comfort. I took Diane's life insurance money, every single penny of the legacy she left me, and I bought this beautiful house in the upscale Denver suburbs. I paid in full, but because I wanted to help Rachel build her credit score, and because I trusted my own flesh and blood implicitly, I put the deed entirely in her name. I handed them the keys to a debt-free mansion, with the sole promise that I would have a small, warm room down the hall and a loving family to spend my final years with. Now that same daughter was throwing a bag of my meager belongings at me, treating me like a stray dog that had wandered into her spotless kingdom. She was selling the house right out from under me, planning to take the money and leave me with nothing. "Did you not hear her?" Derek barked, stepping forward and clapping his hands loudly, treating me like a disobedient child. Move it, old man. Chop chop. The clients will be here any minute and I need this place sanitized. I slowly bent down, my arthritic knees popping in the quiet room. I grabbed the handles of the black duffel bag. It felt unusually heavy, but my mind was too clouded with shock and heartbreak to register the weight. I pulled myself up, looking Rachel directly in the eyes one last time. I wanted her to see the tears welling in my eyes. I wanted her to feel a shred of guilt. She simply turned her back to me and began fluffing the pillows on the expensive leather sofa I had bought for them. "Fine," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I am leaving." I opened the heavy front door, and a blast of icy Colorado wind hit my face, stinging my cheeks like 1,000 tiny needles. The snow was falling thick and fast, blanketing the driveway in pure white. I stepped out onto the porch. Before I could even turn around to say a final goodbye, Derek slammed the door shut behind me. The loud click of the deadbolt locking echoed through the freezing air. I stood alone on the porch, shivering in my thin sweater, clutching the black duffel bag to my chest. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the sky above Denver was a bleak, unforgiving gray. I had no car. I had nowhere to go. My own daughter had just evicted me from the house I bought for her simply because my presence was an inconvenience to her husband's real estate deal. I began to walk down the snow-covered driveway, my boots crunching softly in the silence of the neighborhood. The cold was piercing through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. I realized I needed my thick winter coat. I remembered packing it inside the black duffel bag a few weeks ago when the weather first started to turn. I reached the bus stop at the corner of the street. The wind was howling now. I set the heavy bag down on the icy wooden bench, my fingers numb and trembling as I reached for the zipper. I just wanted my coat. I just wanted a little bit of warmth to survive the afternoon. But as I pulled the zipper open, my heart stopped. The world around me seemed to fall completely silent. Inside the worn black fabric, there was no familiar green wool. There was no heavy collar to protect my neck from the biting Colorado wind. Instead, the bag was stuffed to the brim with neatly organized, thick paper stacks. My numb fingers fumbled as I reached inside my mind, struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. The wind whipped around the bus stop, blowing a fine mist of snow into the open bag, but I barely felt the cold anymore. A sudden burning heat rose in my chest. I pulled out one of the stacks. It was bound tightly with a crisp, white paper band from a major national bank. I flipped it over. They were cashier's checks. There were dozens of them. I wiped a snowflake from my eyelashes and squinted at the amounts printed on the stiff paper. It was $50,000. I pulled out another check from the middle of the stack. $100,000. They were all endorsed, signed, and ready to be deposited or cashed. My hands began to shake violently, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the winter weather. I started pulling out more bundles, counting them rapidly in my head. My years of working with numbers kicked in automatically. 300,000, 500,000. By the time I reached the bottom of the bag, the total sat heavily in my mind. $650,000. I was sitting at a public bus stop, freezing, holding over $500,000 in untraceable liquid assets. This was not possible. Derek was a moderately successful real estate agent, but he was always complaining about cash flow and market slumps. He had just practically begged me to let them sell the house because they were supposedly drowning in debt. Where did this massive fortune come from? I dug deeper into the side pockets of the bag, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a heavy military-grade encrypted USB drive. It was the kind of hardware I used to see in my corporate days dealing with highly sensitive offshore accounts. It was serious technology, the kind that required a biometric scan or a complex alphanumeric passphrase to access. Derek barely knew how to reset the family router. What was he doing with a device meant to hide high-level financial data? A sickening realization began to form in the pit of my stomach. The frantic urgency to sell my house. The sudden desperate need to get me out of the picture. The mysterious clients arriving today. None of it was adding up to a simple real estate transaction. I was looking at an escape fund. As I pushed the USB drive deep into my pants pocket for safekeeping, I noticed a bright flash of color near the bottom of the main compartment. It was a small neon pink sticky note, the kind you buy at any corner drugstore. It was pressed firmly against the final bundle of checks. I peeled it off with trembling fingers. The handwriting was looped elegant and entirely unfamiliar. It was written in bright blue ink. I brought it close to my face, shielding it from the falling snow, and read the words carefully. Get the house money from the old man, dump your wife, and I will see you in Cabo. It was signed with a single name. Vanessa. I read the sentence again, and then a third time. Every word was a hammer blow to my chest. Get the house money from the old man, that was me. Dump your wife, that was my daughter Rachel. I will see you in Cabo. Vanessa. The sheer gravity of the situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. Derek was not just a greedy son-in-law rushing a property sale to clear some debts. He was a predator. He was planning to take the proceeds from the sale of my house, the house I paid for with my dead wife's life insurance, and disappear. He was going to abandon Rachel entirely. He was going to run away to Mexico with this woman, Vanessa, and leave my daughter to face the financial ruin and whatever illegal mess he had created to acquire these cashier's checks. Rachel, despite her cruelty to me just moments ago, was entirely oblivious. She thought they were building a future together. She thought she was being a supportive wife by kicking her own elderly father out onto the street to help her husband close a big deal. She had no idea she was actively helping him pack his bags to abandon her. Then another realization hit me so sharp, it made me gasp out loud. Rachel had grabbed the wrong bag. Earlier that morning, I had packed my old winter coat into my black duffel bag and left it near the front door. Derek must have packed his escape fund into an identical black bag and hidden it in his home office. When Rachel went into a blind rage, screaming at me to take my trash and get out, she must have marched into the office, grabbed the first heavy black bag she saw, and thrown it at my chest. Derek did not know. He was standing right there in the kitchen, sipping his coffee, mocking my old man smell, completely unaware that his wife had just handed me his entire secret fortune and the blueprint to his betrayal. I looked down at the bag in my lap. I was no longer a discarded old man freezing on a bench. I was holding the absolute destruction of Derek's life in my hands. The fear that had gripped me a moment ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I had spent 4 decades tracking missing funds, exposing corporate fraud, and destroying financial criminals in boardrooms. I knew exactly how to ruin a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. I carefully zipped the duffel bag completely shut, making sure no edge of paper was visible. I stood up from the bench, ignoring the pain in my knees and the freezing wind tearing at my thin sweater. I pulled the heavy strap over my shoulder and gripped it tightly. I had to get to a safe place. I had to secure this money and decrypt that flash drive. But before I could even take a step toward the train station, the phone in my pocket began to buzz. I reached in and pulled it out. The screen lit up through the falling snow. It was Derek calling. The phone vibrated in my hand, a steady, demanding pulse against my cold palm. The caller ID flashed Derek's name. Just 20 minutes ago, he had been mocking me, telling me I smelled like a hospital and tossing me out into a snowstorm. Now he was calling me. I took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs to calm my racing heart, and swiped the screen to answer. I brought the phone to my ear, forcing my voice to sound exactly like the frail, confused old man he believed me to be. "Hello," I said, making sure my teeth chattered just a little. "Dad." "Oh my goodness, Dad, is that you?" Derek's voice came through the speaker, dripping with a sickeningly sweet, exaggerated concern that immediately made my stomach turn. Listen, I am so incredibly sorry about earlier. Rachel was just so stressed about the house showing, and she completely lost her temper. But I was just looking out the window and the weather is getting really terrible out there. It is freezing. Where are you? Please tell me you found somewhere warm to sit down. I am coming to pick you up right now to bring you back home where you belong. The sheer audacity of his lie was almost impressive. He did not care about the snow. He did not care if I froze to death on a park bench. He had just gone into his office, noticed the wrong bag was missing, and realized that his father-in-law had just walked out the front door with $650,000 and his ticket to a new life. I am just at the bus stop down the street, Derek. I lied smoothly, my voice trembling perfectly on cue. The wind is so strong. I was just trying to find my winter coat in this bag Rachel threw at me, but the zipper is stuck. I cannot seem to get it open. My hands are too cold to make it work. A sharp intake of breath hissed through the receiver. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated panic, barely masked by his fake warmth. Oh, do not worry about the zipper, Dad. Do not even try to open it. Your coat is actually still in the hall closet. Rachel just grabbed some old gym bag by mistake. Just stay exactly where you are. Do not move an inch. I am grabbing my car keys right now. I will be there in 2 minutes. He hung up before I could reply. The line went dead. I pocketed my phone and instantly sprang into action. The arthritis in my knees seemed to vanish, replaced by a surge of adrenaline I had not felt since my days tearing apart fraudulent corporate ledgers in Chicago. 2 minutes. I did not have 2 minutes. But I knew this neighborhood better than he did. I knew that the local commuter train station was just a narrow alleyway and a parking lot away completely out of sight from the main road where Derek would be driving. I hoisted the heavy black bag over my shoulder and practically ran through the snow. The wind whipped violently against my face, but I pushed forward, slipping through the gap between 2 tall hedges that bordered the local park. I emerged into the train station parking lot, just as I heard the distant roar of Derek's expensive sports car speeding down our street. He was rushing to the bus stop, expecting to find a helpless old man holding his treasure. I hurried inside the small heated station terminal. It was mostly empty, save for a few commuters huddled with their coffees. I made a beeline straight for the row of automated rental lockers bolted to the far wall. I quickly fed a crisp $20 bill into the machine, selected a locker in the bottom corner where the security cameras had a blind spot, and shoved the heavy duffel bag inside. I slammed the metal door shut, punched in a secure 4-digit PIN code that only an auditor would remember, and pulled the printed receipt from the slot. I folded the small slip of paper into a tiny square and tucked it deep inside my left sock. The $650,000, the encrypted flash drive, and the pink sticky note from Vanessa were now completely safe. But I could not just walk out there empty-handed. Derek was looking for a bag. If I did not have one, he would know I hid it, and the confrontation would happen right here, right now. I needed a decoy, and I needed it fast. I rushed over to the small convenience store located right inside the station terminal. My eyes scanned the cramped aisles until I spotted exactly what I was looking for. Hanging on a metal rack near the back were cheap, unbranded black nylon duffel bags sold for tourists who bought too many souvenirs. I grabbed one that looked almost identical in size and shape to Derek's bag. I tossed it onto the counter along with a thick, heavy local phone book from the magazine rack. The cashier looked at me with confusion as I handed her a $50 bill and told her to keep the change. I ripped the tags off the new bag and moved to the recycling bin near the exit. I stuffed the heavy phone book right into the center of the bag to give it the necessary weight. Then I grabbed handfuls of discarded newspapers from the bin, crumpling them up and packing them tightly around the phone book to give the bag a full, bulky shape. I zipped it shut. It was a perfect match. I stepped out of the station and walked back toward the main road, making sure to look lost and shivering. Within moments, Derek's car came skidding around the corner, his eyes wild with panic, until they locked onto me and the black bag slung over my shoulder. The tires skidded against the icy curb, sending a spray of slush onto my boots. Derek threw himself out of the driver's seat before the car fully stopped. He rushed toward me, his coat flapping in the cold wind. His eyes were wide with frantic desperation. His gaze dropped to the black duffel bag resting against my hip. "Dad," he breathed out, panting. "Thank goodness. You must be freezing. Let me take that for you." He snatched the strap from my shoulder before I could reply. He grunted at the weight of the thick phone book hidden inside. Relief washed over his pale face. He thought he had his $650,000 back. He thought his plan was intact. I pulled my sweater tighter around my chest and let out a cough, leaning into the role of the frail old man. "I wanted my coat," I mumbled, keeping my voice weak. Rachel was so angry. I did not want to make her angrier by staying. "I know," he said, patting my back. "She overreacted earlier today. The client's rescheduled anyway. Let us get you into the warm car." The drive back was thick with tension. The heater was blasting, but the atmosphere inside the car was ice cold. Derek kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, but his eyes constantly darted to the rearview mirror, checking the bag in the back seat. He cleared his throat, trying to figure out how to interrogate me without sounding suspicious. So he began forcing a chuckle that sounded unnatural. "I am sorry about the mix-up with the bags today, Dad. That duffel you grabbed belongs to my office. It is full of sensitive client tax documents. Boring stuff but completely confidential. You did not happen to open it, did you?" I turned my head slowly to look at him, narrowing my eyes as if I were struggling to understand his words. I made sure to let my lower lip tremble just a tiny fraction. "Open it," I repeated, sighing heavily. "Derek, my arthritis is acting up terribly in this freezing cold. My knuckles are completely swollen. I tugged at that metal zipper for 10 minutes out there on the wooden bench, but it was completely stuck. I could not even get it to budge a single inch. I just wanted my coat. My hands were too numb to pull the tab." I watched his profile closely. The heavy tension in his jaw visibly vanished. The tight grip he had on the steering wheel loosened. He let out a long breath, and a genuine, albeit arrogant smile spread across his face. "Well, that is a relief," he said, his tone instantly lighter. "I mean, not about your hands, of course. We will get you some warm tea as soon as we get back. I just did not want you getting paper cuts or messing up my careful filing system." When we finally pulled into the driveway, the snow was piling up on the front lawn. We walked inside, and the sudden blast of warm air from the grand foyer was a stark contrast to the bitter chill outside. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone. She did not even look up when we entered. There was no apology offered. There was no relief that her elderly father had not frozen to death in the terrible storm. She just sighed, clearly annoyed that her husband had brought the inconvenience back into her pristine home. Dinner was a quiet and tense affair. Rachel had ordered expensive takeout, serving it on her fancy ceramic plates. The three of us sat around the large mahogany dining table. The black duffel bag rested on the floor right next to the chair belonging to Derek. He absolutely refused to let it out of his sight. I ate slowly, taking small and deliberate bites, maintaining my careful disguise. Derek was in high spirits now. He poured himself a generous glass of expensive red wine, swirling it around in the glass. He even attempted to make small talk about the weather and his upcoming business meetings, completely ignoring the fact that his wife had literally thrown me out of the house hours earlier. Rachel remained mostly silent, offering only short and dismissive answers. She seemed very irritated by his sudden good mood. She had no idea that her husband was mentally packing his bags for a beautiful beach in Mexico with his secret mistress. She had no idea that he was planning to leave her drowning in a massive mountain of debt. And she certainly had no idea that the frail old man sitting across from her, quietly chewing his roast beef, was holding the ultimate detonator to their entire lives. As the tense meal finally came to an end, I slowly wiped my mouth with a white linen napkin, and placed it gently on the table. "I think I will go lie down now," I said, pushing my heavy chair back with a loud scrape against the hardwood floor. The freezing cold really took it out of me today. "Good idea, Dad," Derek said cheerfully, taking a final sip of his wine. "Get some rest." He stood up, grabbed the heavy black duffel bag by the sturdy handles, and slung it proudly over his shoulder. He did not even look at Rachel. He just marched straight past the kitchen and headed up the carpeted stairs toward his private home office. He was eager to lock his fake treasure away in his safe. He was eager to secure his future. I watched his retreating back, my face entirely blank. He thought he had successfully manipulated a senile, half-blind old man. He thought his secrets were securely zipped inside that cheap nylon bag. But the only thing waiting for him inside that bag was a thick stack of old newspapers and a heavy local phone book. My real work was just about to begin right now. The grandfather clock in the downstairs hallway chimed quietly, signaling that it was 2 in the morning. I lay perfectly still in my small bed, staring up at the dark ceiling. The house was completely silent, save for the rhythmic howling of the winter wind rattling the window panes. I carefully pushed the heavy quilt aside and swung my legs over the edge of the mattress. My joints ached from the freezing cold earlier that day, but I ignored the pain. I slipped into my soft leather slippers to muffle my footsteps and crept out of my bedroom. The hallway was pitch black. I did not turn on any lights. I navigated the familiar corridor by memory, keeping my hand pressed lightly against the cool painted wall for balance. As I approached the heavy oak door of Derek's private home office, a thin sliver of yellow light bled out from underneath the frame. I held my breath and pressed my ear against the solid wood. The sounds coming from the other side were chaotic and desperate. I could hear the frantic tearing of nylon and the violent ripping of paper. Derek was not just opening the bag. He was destroying it. I heard a heavy thud as the thick local phone book I had bought at the station hit the wooden floorboards. Derek let out a muffled, agonizing groan. It was the sound of a man watching his entire fraudulent empire collapse into dust. He began kicking the desk chair, muttering vicious curses under his breath. He knew he had been played. He knew the money was gone, the encrypted drive was gone, and his golden ticket to Cabo with his mistress had vanished into thin air. But he also knew he could not call the police. You cannot exactly report a bag full of stolen, illegally endorsed cashier's checks as missing property. He was completely trapped in his own web of deceit. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked behind me. I quickly retreated into the deep shadow of an alcove just as the door to the master bedroom opened down the hall. Rachel stepped out, tightening a silk robe around her waist. She looked annoyed, marching straight toward the office. She pushed the door open without knocking. I leaned forward, keeping myself perfectly hidden in the darkness, angling my head to hear every single word. "What on earth are you doing in here?" Rachel demanded, her voice sharp and irritated. "It is the middle of the night, Derek. I am trying to sleep, and you are in here throwing furniture around. What is all this trash on the floor?" Derek scrambled to his feet, his breathing heavy and erratic. "It is nothing," he stammered, his voice cracking with panic. "I was just looking for a specific file. I must have misplaced it. I am just stressed about the showing tomorrow." Rachel let out a harsh, condescending sigh. "You are always stressed lately," she snapped. "You need to get it together. We are so close to finishing this." I felt a cold chill wash over me that had nothing to do with the winter draft. Finishing what? I pressed closer to the doorway, straining to catch their conversation. "I just want this to be over." Rachel continued, her tone dripping with exhaustion and malice. "I cannot stand having him in the house anymore, walking around like a sad ghost expecting us to be grateful. The house is legally mine. He gave it to me. We need that equity to cover our debts, and we cannot sell it properly with him lingering around trying to claim some sort of moral ownership." Derek cleared his throat nervously, still clearly distracted by the loss of his secret fortune. "I know, honey," he said, trying to placate her, "but we have to be smart about this. If we just throw him out without a legal reason, he could hire a lawyer and cause trouble with the title transfer. He could claim elder abuse or try to revoke the original gift. Rachel laughed a cold and hollow sound that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. Hire a lawyer with what money, she mocked. He spent his entire savings buying this place for us. Besides, that is exactly why we are moving forward with the medical route, Rachel stated matter-of-factly. Dr. Evans is a very close friend of mine. He has already agreed to backdate the evaluations. We are going to officially declare that my father is suffering from advanced dementia and is completely mentally incompetent. Once I have the medical power of attorney signed by a judge, I take full control of his remaining retirement accounts. He still has a small pension fund sitting there that we can drain to cover the legal fees. And then what? Derek asked, his voice shaking slightly. Then we put him in that state-run nursing facility in Boulder. Rachel replied without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. It is entirely paid for by the government. He will be out of our hair forever. We sell the house and we finally get our lives back. He will not even know what day it is in a few months anyway. I stood in the dark hallway, my hands balled into tight fists. My own daughter. The child I had rocked to sleep, the child I had sacrificed my wife's life insurance for, was plotting to strip me of my human rights. She wanted to lock me in a desolate state-funded facility and steal my last remaining pennies, all while her husband was simultaneously planning to leave her with nothing. It was a symphony of betrayal. They both thought I was a weak, gullible old fool. They thought they held all the cards in this twisted game. But they were gravely mistaken. I slowly backed away from the office door, stepped perfectly silently down the long, dark hallway, and retreated to the quiet safety of my room to plan. The first rays of dawn crept through the frosted window of my bedroom, casting a pale, cold light across the floor. I had not slept a single wink. My mind had been racing for hours, meticulously categorizing every piece of information I had gathered during the night. The betrayal of my daughter and the criminal desperation of my son-in-law formed a clear, undeniable picture. I knew that if I stayed in this house for even one more day, I would be trapped. Rachel was already plotting with her corrupt doctor friend to strip away my legal rights, and Derek was a ticking time bomb who would inevitably realize his precious duffel bag was completely filled with nothing but old news. I had to get out, and I had to do it on my own terms before they could make their next move. I slowly pushed myself out of bed and began to pack a small, battered leather suitcase. I only took a few changes of clothes, my basic toiletries, and a handful of essential documents I kept hidden beneath the floorboards of my closet. I left behind the expensive suits and the sentimental items. I needed to travel light, and more importantly, I needed to look like a defeated man who had simply given up the fight. By the time I heard the heavy footsteps of Derek coming down the stairs, I was already sitting at the kitchen island, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee. I slouched my shoulders, letting my posture sag to mimic the crushing weight of depression. I practiced a vacant, sorrowful expression, making sure my eyes looked red and tired. Derek walked into the kitchen wearing a crisp suit for his upcoming real estate showings. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes, likely from spending the entire night trying to salvage his ruined escape plan. Rachel followed shortly after, tying her silk robe tight. She glared at me the moment she saw me occupying her pristine kitchen space. "Good morning," I murmured, my voice intentionally raspy and weak. I did not look up from my coffee mug. Rachel sighed heavily, walking past me to the espresso machine. "What is it now, Dad?" she asked, her tone laced with irritation. "We have a very busy day ahead of us, and I really do not have the energy for another emotional breakdown." I took a slow, trembling breath, playing my part to absolute perfection. "I know, Rachel," I said softly. "I know I have been difficult lately. Last night, lying in bed, I had a lot of time to think about everything that happened yesterday. About the argument, the house showing, and how much stress my presence is putting on your marriage. I realized that you were right. I am just a burden to you both." Derek stopped pouring his cereal and looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly with suspicion. "What are you saying, Harrison?" he asked cautiously. "I am saying that I am moving out," I replied finally, lifting my head to meet their gaze. "I have packed a small bag. There is a cheap motel just off the highway, the one near the old diner. They rent rooms by the week for a very low cash rate. I am going to stay there for a while. I need to get out of your hair so you can focus on selling this beautiful house and getting your finances back in order. I do not want to be the reason you two are constantly fighting." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I watched carefully as a tidal wave of relief washed over Rachel's face. She tried to hide it behind a mask of fake concern, biting her lower lip, but the triumphant gleam in her eyes was unmistakable. She thought her cruel words yesterday had finally broken my spirit. She thought she had successfully bullied me into self-eviction, saving her the trouble of legally forcing me out before the fake medical diagnosis was finalized. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Rachel asked, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "I mean, a motel off the highway is not exactly comfortable for a man your age. We did not mean to make you feel like a burden. We are just under a lot of pressure right now." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression entirely submissive. "I am sure, sweetheart. It is for the best. You need your space. I will manage just fine. I will call a taxi to come pick me up in 10 minutes. I will leave the house keys on the counter." Derek practically beamed. He quickly stepped forward and placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Listen, Dad. If you really think this is what you need to do, we support you. It is incredibly mature of you to recognize the situation. Let me at least pay for your cab fare to the motel. It is the least I can do after the misunderstanding with the bags yesterday." I suppressed the intense urge to slap his hand away. "Thank you, Derek," I whispered. "That is very kind of you." 15 minutes later, I was standing on the snow-covered driveway, clutching my small suitcase as a yellow taxi pulled up to the curb. Rachel and Derek stood on the front porch waving goodbye with expressions of pure, unadulterated joy. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated an old senile man into abandoning his $1 million home, leaving them free to execute their selfish, destructive plans. They truly believed I was crawling away to die quietly in a cheap roadside motel. I slid into the back seat and closed the heavy door. As the taxi driver pulled away, I looked through the rear window, watching the large house disappear. I felt absolutely no sadness or regret. The frail old man they knew was now completely gone. It was finally time to strike back. I instructed the taxi driver to make a quick detour before heading to the motel. He pulled up to the commuter train station, leaving the meter running, while I hurried inside. The terminal was quiet now. I walked straight to the bank of rental lockers, reached down into my sock, and pulled out the small folded slip of paper. My fingers were steady as I punched the 4-digit code into the electronic keypad. The heavy metal door popped open with a satisfying click. I grabbed the real black duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked back out to the waiting cab. 20 minutes later, the driver dropped me off at the fading, neon-lit entrance of the motor lodge. It was a depressing cinder-block building with peeling paint and flickering exterior lights. I paid in cash at the bulletproof glass window and received a physical brass key attached to a heavy plastic diamond. Room 112. I walked down the icy exterior corridor and let myself into the room. It smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial pine cleaner. The carpet was a stained mustard yellow, and the bedspread was thin and heavily worn. It was a massive downgrade from the sweeping vaulted ceilings and heated floors of the $1 million home I had purchased for my daughter. But as I locked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy blackout curtains shut against the winter morning light, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. This dingy, forgotten room was my new fortress. I placed my small leather suitcase on the sagging mattress and opened it. I pushed aside my folded shirts and shaving kit, reaching for the false bottom I had built into the lining. I pulled out my laptop. It was not a basic consumer model. It was a heavy, high-processing machine built for crunching massive amounts of encrypted data. I set it up on the small, wobbly laminate desk in the corner of the room and plugged it into the wall outlet. I pulled up the wooden chair and sat down. Next, I unzipped the black duffel bag and pulled out the stacks of cashier checks. $650,000 rested on the cheap motel desk. I placed the bright pink sticky note from Vanessa next to the money. Finally, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy military-grade encrypted USB drive. I held it in the palm of my hand, feeling its cold metal casing. Derek thought I was a confused, helpless old man who spent his days doing crossword puzzles and taking naps. Rachel thought I was just a tired pensioner who had handed over his life savings out of desperate, foolish love. They had absolutely no idea who they were actually dealing with. Before my wife got sick, before I became the quiet, accommodating father, they manipulated so easily I spent 40 years as a senior forensic auditor for one of the most ruthless hedge funds in downtown Chicago. I was the man they called when millions of dollars mysteriously vanished from corporate ledgers. I was the financial predator who hunted down corrupt executives, untangled complex webs of offshore shell companies, and destroyed the careers of men who thought they could outsmart the system. I did not just look at spreadsheets. I dissected them. I found the hidden truths buried in mountains of digital lies. I spent decades swimming with absolute sharks in the darkest, most cutthroat waters of the financial industry. And Derek, a mediocre suburban real estate agent who could not even keep his own lies straight, had decided to swim in my pool. It was a fatal mistake. He had looked at my silver hair and quiet demeanor, seeing only a weak target. He never once stopped to consider that some old men are quiet simply because they are patiently waiting to strike back. I powered on my laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating the dark motel room. I inserted the USB drive into the side port. The computer immediately recognized the external hardware. A small window popped up on the screen demanding a password. I leaned forward, cracking my knuckles. The arthritis pain that I had faked so convincingly earlier was nowhere to be found. My mind was sharp-focused and entirely engaged. The drive was encrypted, but the software protecting it was an off-the-shelf, commercially available program. It was designed to keep out curious spouses and amateur hackers, not someone with my level of specialized clearance and decades of technical experience. I opened a backdoor decryption terminal on my laptop and began running a brute force algorithm I had coded myself years ago. As the numbers scrolled rapidly across the black screen, I examined the digital footprint Derek had left behind. He was incredibly sloppy. He had not masked his IP address when setting up the initial partition, and he had used a predictable sequencing pattern for the data clusters. It took less than 7 minutes for my algorithm to find the fatal flaw in his security setup. The firewall collapsed, and the password prompt vanished. A new folder appeared on my desktop, completely unlocked and ready to be explored. I clicked on it, opening a massive directory of spreadsheets, scanned legal documents, PDF files, and email archives. I leaned back in the creaky wooden chair, my eyes scanning the endless rows of file names. This was Derek's entire secret life laid bare before me. He had documented every single terrible decision, every hidden transaction, and every lie he had ever told. The sheer volume of the data was staggering, but to me it was like reading a familiar, well-loved book. I took a sip of the terrible complimentary motel coffee I had brewed in the cheap plastic machine by the bathroom sink. It tasted like bitter dirt, but it grounded me. I clicked on the first spreadsheet titled Master Ledger and began to read. The rows and columns of the massive spreadsheet were a chaotic mess of amateur bookkeeping. Derek had tried to mask his massive financial hemorrhaging by mislabeling transactions as vague business expenses and marketing investments. But to a trained eye, the truth was glaringly obvious. I followed the digital breadcrumbs tracing the flow of capital from his legitimate business checking accounts out into the vast, unregulated void of the internet. It started small at first, a few $1,000s wired to a cryptocurrency exchange. Then, as the dates progressed, the amounts grew exponentially. 50,000, 100,000. He was chasing losses, falling victim to the classic sunk cost fallacy. I opened a subfolder filled with screenshots and panicked email drafts. Derek had gotten himself tangled in a massive offshore crypto pump and dump scheme. He believed he was an investing genius, taking advice from anonymous online forums, funneling every spare cent he and Rachel had into a worthless digital token. The charts he had saved showed a sudden catastrophic plummet. Within a matter of 48 hours, his entire portfolio had evaporated. His net worth went from a comfortable cushion to absolute zero. He was completely wiped out. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, the harsh blue light reflecting off my glasses. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as I cross-referenced the dates of his financial losses with his sudden change in behavior at home. It all perfectly aligned. The sleepless nights, the sudden bursts of unwarranted anger toward Rachel, the aggressive push to sell the house. He was a drowning man, thrashing in deep water, desperately trying to find a lifeline before the waves swallowed him completely. But the crypto scam was only the tip of the iceberg. When a man like Derek loses everything, he does not humbly admit defeat and ask for help. His ego simply will not allow it. Instead, he doubles down. He looks for shortcuts. I closed the master ledger and clicked on a heavily encrypted PDF file buried 3 layers deep inside a folder deceptively named Client Closing Costs 2024. My decryption software stripped away the security protocols in a matter of seconds. The document that opened on my screen made my blood run ice cold. It was a promissory note, a loan agreement, but it was not from any established bank, credit union, or legitimate financial institution. The lender was listed as a vague limited liability company, registered to a vacant warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. I knew exactly what kind of organization used this specific type of corporate shell structure. It was a shadow syndicate. Unregulated predatory lenders who catered to desperate gamblers, failing business owners, and fools who had run out of legal options. They did not care about credit scores or background checks. They only cared about collateral, and their collection methods were notoriously brutal. I scrolled down to the loan terms. The principal amount borrowed was a staggering $500,000. The interest rate was absolutely criminal, compounding monthly, at a percentage that guaranteed the borrower would never truly pay off the debt. But it was the collateral section that made my breath catch in my throat. Derek had secured this massive illegal loan using the deed to the $1 million home I had purchased, the home that was legally entirely in Rachel's name. I zoomed in on the signature line at the bottom of the final page. There it was, my daughter's signature signed in smooth, flowing blue ink. Except it was not her signature. I had watched Rachel sign her name on countless birthday cards and school forms since she was a little girl. I knew the specific loop of her capital letters and the sharp slant of her handwriting. The signature on this catastrophic loan agreement was a meticulous, practiced forgery. Derek had used his position as a licensed real estate agent and his intimate access to his wife's personal documents to perfectly fake her authorization. He had secretly pledged her only major asset to a syndicate of dangerous criminals without her having the slightest clue. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening clarity. Derek had taken the $500,000 from the shadow syndicate to cover his immediate debts and try to buy himself some time, but the crushing monthly interest payments had quickly drained that cash injection. The syndicate was undoubtedly closing in on him, threatening to call in the loan and seize the collateral. They were coming for the house. If they foreclosed, Rachel would not just be left homeless. She would be personally liable for a massive debt she never agreed to. Her credit ruined, her future entirely destroyed by her husband's reckless greed. That was why he was so incredibly frantic to sell the property today. He needed to liquidate the asset, pay off the shadow lenders, to save his own skin, and then use whatever money was left over to flee the country with his mistress. He was perfectly willing to let his wife take the ultimate fall. He was going to leave her standing in the wreckage of their marriage, facing down aggressive debt collectors and potential fraud charges, while he sat on a beautiful beach sipping cocktails. The sheer malice of his plan was breathtaking. I sat back in the creaky motel chair, staring at the digital evidence of his crimes. The silence of the cheap room felt deafening. I had always disliked Derek, sensing a deep arrogance and a profound lack of character beneath his polished salesman smile. But I had never imagined he was capable of this level of calculated cruelty. He had built a house of cards on a foundation of pure deceit, and it was swaying violently in the wind. I reached over and placed my hand on the thick stacks of cashier checks sitting on the desk next to my computer, ready for the next shocking revelation. The paper was thick, premium stock. I ran my thumb over the raised ink of the routing numbers printed at the bottom of the top check. $50,000. Issued by a reputable national bank, made payable to a generic-sounding holding company that I had already identified in Derek's files as a shell corporation he set up just 3 weeks ago. I picked up the next check. $100,000 issued from a different bank, but payable to that same shell company. I needed to know exactly whose pockets he had picked. I turned my attention back to the laptop screen and opened a new search query within his decrypted hard drive. I typed in the exact dollar amounts from the checks, cross-referencing them with the dates they were issued. The search engine hummed for a few seconds before returning a localized hit. A folder labeled simply as Escrow Deposits 2024. I clicked the folder open and my stomach churned. They were purchase agreements, wire transfer receipts, and good faith deposit logs for his real estate clients. I opened the first file matching the $50,000 amount. It belonged to a young couple, first-time homebuyers who had put down their life savings as earnest money for a modest starter home in the suburbs. I checked the routing numbers from their wire transfer against the numbers on the cashier check sitting on my desk. They were a perfect, undeniable match. I opened the next file matching the $100,000 check. It was the down payment from an elderly widow looking to downsize after her husband passed away. Derek had taken her money too. I went through every single check in the bag, matching them to the heartbroken files of families and individuals who had trusted him with their futures. He had not just borrowed from a shadowy syndicate. He had systematically embezzled $650,000 directly from his own clients. He had drained their escrow accounts, laundering the funds through his fake shell company to convert them into untraceable cashier checks. This was no longer just a messy suburban divorce or a bad business decision. This was a massive federal financial crime. It was grand larceny on a scale that would carry a mandatory federal prison sentence. And I was holding all the evidence in a cheap nylon bag. I sat back and let the horrifying brilliance of his master plan wash over me. It was a perfectly orchestrated sequence of betrayal. Derek was completely bankrupt from his offshore crypto disaster. He was drowning in high-interest debt from the violent shadow syndicate. The syndicate was undoubtedly threatening his life, demanding their $500,000 back. So he devised a way out that would save his own skin and leave everyone else to burn. First, he forged Rachel's signature to pledge the house as collateral, keeping the violent lenders temporarily at bay. Then he began stealing the escrow deposits from his clients, slowly building an untraceable cash reserve. Now the final phase of his plan was unfolding today. The urgent, desperate house showing. The panicked need to get me out of the property. He was going to push this sale through as fast as humanly possible. He would take whatever legitimate equity was left from the sale, add it to the stolen client funds, and completely vanish. When the shadow syndicate realized they had been played, they would come looking for the collateral. They would come looking for the person whose signature was on that forged loan agreement. They would come for Rachel. My daughter would be left entirely alone, completely blindsided, facing aggressive, violent debt collectors for a $500,000 loan she never took out. She would lose the house, her credit, and potentially her safety. And where would Derek be while his wife faced total ruin? I clicked on a subfolder labeled Travel Itineraries, heavily hidden behind a fake system icon. Inside were 2 first-class plane tickets booked for late tonight, departing from Denver International Airport. The destination was San Jose del Cabo, Mexico. The names on the tickets were Derek Lawson and Vanessa Palmer. There were also digital receipts for a luxury beachfront villa rental paid 3 months in advance, and documents confirming the establishment of a new offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands, ready to receive the stolen escrow funds once they arrived. The pink sticky note had laid it all out perfectly. "Get the house money from the old man, dump your wife, and I will see you in Cabo." I stared at the screen, a cold and terrifying calm settling over my entire body. Derek had treated me like a senile inconvenience. He had treated his clients like personal piggy banks. And he had treated my daughter, the woman he swore to protect, like a sacrificial lamb to be slaughtered for his own freedom. He was a coward who destroyed lives without a second thought, completely confident that he was the smartest person in the room. But he made one catastrophic miscalculation. He let me pack my bags. I closed the laptop and placed my hands flat on the desk. The sadness and betrayal I had felt yesterday were completely gone, replaced by a deep, dark resolve. I was not going to simply call the police and hand over the evidence. That would be too quick, too easy. A standard arrest would allow him to hire a lawyer, drag out the process, and maybe even find a way to drag Rachel down with him by claiming she was an accomplice. No, I needed to dismantle him piece by piece. I needed to trap him in a financial cage so tight he would never breathe free air again. I needed to ensure that when the hammer fell, it fell on him and him alone with such absolute devastation that he would understand exactly who put him in the ground. I carefully packed my laptop back into the false bottom of my suitcase. I placed the massive stack of cashier checks and the encrypted flash drive into a secure waterproof envelope I found in my travel kit. I tucked the bright pink sticky note safely into my breast pocket. I left the decoy black duffel bag sitting on the wobbly motel desk, a hollow monument to Derek and his pathetic greed. I walked out of the dingy room, locking the flimsy door behind me, and walked over to the main road to hail another taxi. I gave the driver an address in the heart of downtown Denver, far away from the quiet suburban streets, where my daughter was currently plotting my downfall. 30 minutes later, I stood in the sleek marble lobby of one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. I did not have an appointment, but when you have spent 40 years navigating the treacherous waters of high finance, you build relationships that bypass receptionists and waiting rooms. I took the private elevator up to the top floor and walked straight into the corner office of Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan was a legal shark, a man I had worked alongside during my most complex corporate audits in Chicago. He had retired to Denver a few years ago to open his own practice catering strictly to high-net-worth clients and complex financial litigation. He was ruthless, brilliant, and fiercely loyal. He looked up from his massive mahogany desk as I walked in, his sharp blue eyes widening in surprise. He took one look at my tired face and the waterproof envelope in my hand, and he immediately instructed his secretary to hold all his calls for the rest of the afternoon. I sat down in the plush leather chair opposite him and dropped the envelope onto his pristine desk. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I opened the seal, pulled out the thick stacks of stolen cashier checks, and spread them out across the polished wood. Then I placed the flash drive right in the center. Jonathan stared at the fortune sitting in front of him. He picked up one of the checks, his trained eyes instantly recognizing the routing numbers and the shell company payee. He looked back at me, his expression deadly serious. "Tell me exactly what I am looking at, Harrison," he said, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. For the next hour, I laid out the entire miserable story. I told him about the eviction, the switched bags, the forged loan documents, the shadow syndicate, and the systematic embezzlement of client escrow funds. I showed him the pink sticky note from Vanessa and explained Derek's plan to abandon Rachel and flee to Mexico tonight. Jonathan listened in absolute silence, his face an unreadable mask. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, heavy sigh. He ran a hand through his silver hair and shook his head in disbelief. "This is not just a divorce case," Harrison Jonathan said quietly. "This is a massive federal crime. Your son-in-law has essentially handed you his head on a silver platter. We need to call the authorities immediately. I have a contact at the local field office who handles financial crimes. They will have Derek in custody before his flight boards tonight." I raised a hand, stopping him before he could reach for his desk phone. "No," I said, my voice cold and steady. "We are not calling the police." "Not yet." Jonathan frowned, clearly confused. "What do you mean, not yet?" "He stole over $500,000 from innocent people. He forged your daughter's signature to leverage $1 million asset. If you do not report this, you could be considered an accessory after the fact." "I know the law, Jonathan," I replied calmly. "And I know what happens if we bring the police in right now. Derek will hire a defense attorney. He will claim he was under extreme duress. He might even try to throw Rachel under the bus, claiming she was a willing participant in the fraud, since her name is on the deed and the loan documents. And Rachel, my own daughter, will play the naive, heartbroken victim. She will cry in front of the cameras, completely ignoring the fact that she was actively planning to lock me in a state-run asylum just to steal my pension. I do not just want him to go to jail, Jonathan. I want to legally dismantle his entire life, and I want my daughter to realize she backed the wrong horse." Jonathan studied my face for a long moment, seeing the absolute conviction in my eyes. He slowly pulled his hand away from the phone. "You want to ruin him yourself?" He stated, a small, dangerous smile touching the corners of his mouth. "I want to trap him in a corner where neither a lawyer nor his precious mistress can save him," I corrected. "He thinks he is a financial genius. I want to show him what a real predator looks like. And I need your help to do it legally and flawlessly." Jonathan chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. He pulled a fresh legal pad from his drawer and grabbed a silver pen. "I have missed working with you, Harrison. Tell me what you have in mind." I pointed to the flash drive. "Derek owes $500,000 to a shadow syndicate. He is desperate to sell the house today to pay them off. But what if the syndicate no longer holds the debt? What if a completely legitimate, incredibly aggressive collection agency suddenly bought that terrible debt right out from under them today? An agency that demands immediate payment in full and has the absolute legal authority to seize the collateral immediately." Jonathan's eyes lit up with predatory understanding. "You want to buy the loan? You want to become his creditor?" "Exactly," I said. "I want to buy the paper. These shadow syndicates operate on a very simple premise. They want a massive return on their investment, but above all, they want liquidity. They do not want to go through a drawn-out foreclosure process on a suburban home dealing with real estate agents and messy legal evictions. If someone offers them the principal amount, plus a guaranteed immediate premium in clean, untraceable cash, they will sell that debt in a heartbeat. They will wash their hands of Derek entirely." Jonathan nodded slowly, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "We can do it," he said, pulling his keyboard closer. "We need to set up a holding company right now. A ghost entity. Something with layers of corporate anonymity, so Derek never sees your name on the paperwork until it is far too late. We will call it Apex Financial. I have a few shell corporations already registered in Delaware, just sitting on the shelf for emergencies like this. We can transfer ownership and activate the LLC within the hour. It will be completely untraceable. Anyone searching public records will only find a registered agent in a generic office building. They will never connect Apex back to you. But Harrison, there is a major problem here. Buying a $500,000 loan requires $500,000 in actual liquid cash. We cannot use the stolen cashier checks from your bag. That money is evidence. It belongs to Derek's victims. It has to be returned to them untouched. How are you going to fund this buyout?" I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Rachel and Derek always assumed they knew everything about my finances. They knew about Diane's life insurance, and they knew about my standard corporate pension. When I gave them the money for the house, Rachel assumed I had completely emptied my reserves. She thought I was a dependent, living on a fixed income entirely at her mercy. That was why she was so eager to declare me mentally incompetent to seize whatever scraps were left. But you do not spend 40 years as a senior auditor for a major hedge fund without learning how to aggressively multiply your own capital. I had spent decades building a private, highly diversified investment portfolio. It was buried in offshore trusts and index funds that Rachel knew absolutely nothing about. I had always planned to leave this portfolio to Rachel in my will, hoping she would mature over time. But her actions yesterday completely erased that desire. She threw my love away for the illusion of control and wealth. I did not hide it from her out of malice. I hid it because I knew her pragmatic, greedy nature, and I wanted to ensure I was never treated like a walking ATM. Well, she treated me like garbage anyway. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small, encrypted mobile banking device. "I have the funds, Jonathan," I said smoothly. "Clean, untraceable, and ready to be wired instantly. Set up Apex Financial." Jonathan did not ask any more questions. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Within 45 minutes, Apex Financial was a fully registered, legally binding entity operating out of a virtual office in Wilmington, Delaware. Jonathan then picked up his secure landline. He used the contact information listed on the forged loan document I had decrypted from Derek's hard drive. The negotiation was remarkably brief. Shadow lenders do not waste time with pleasantries. Jonathan introduced himself as a corporate acquisition attorney representing a private equity firm interested in distressed debt. He offered them the full $500,000 principal plus a 20% premium for their trouble payable immediately via wire transfer. Just as I predicted, the syndicate representative accepted the offer without a second of hesitation. They were thrilled to offload a messy suburban real estate collateral for instant clean cash. I typed a series of complex authorization codes into my banking device. I watched the screen as $600,000 vanished from my private offshore account and dropped straight into the escrow account Jonathan had just opened for Apex Financial. 10 minutes later, the secure fax machine in the corner of Jonathan's office hummed to life. A thick stack of documents began to spill out into the plastic tray. It was the deed of assignment. Jonathan gathered the pages, quickly reviewing the legal jargon to ensure everything was ironclad. He placed the final page on the desk in front of me and handed me his heavy silver pen. "Sign here, acting as the managing director of Apex Financial," he instructed. I took the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name with a smooth, deliberate stroke. The ink dried, sealing the trap completely. It was done. I set the pen down on the desk. I was now officially, legally, and undeniably Derek's sole creditor. I owned the $500,000 debt. More importantly, I held the absolute first position lien on the house. Derek could not sell that property. He could not transfer the title. He could not access a single penny of equity without my explicit written permission. He was currently running around Denver, sweating through his suit, frantically trying to close a real estate deal to pay off a syndicate of dangerous criminals. He had absolutely no idea that the criminals were already gone. He had no idea that the ruthless entity holding his financial life by the throat was the very same frail old man he had kicked out into the snow just a few hours ago. The house of cards he had built was no longer swaying in the wind. It was already crushed. And I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to show him the absolute devastation he had brought upon his own head. His arrogance blinded him, but soon he would learn the true cost of underestimating a patient father who had nothing left to lose. I left Jonathan's office feeling a profound sense of control that I had not experienced in years. The crisp afternoon air of downtown Denver filled my lungs as I hailed a cab back to my motel room. The contrast between the mahogany walls of the law firm and the peeling wallpaper of room 112 was stark, but I found comfort in the shadows. I knew my isolation here was only temporary. I settled back into the creaky wooden chair, reviewing the digital files on my laptop, waiting for the next piece of this twisted puzzle to fall into place. It did not take long. Just after 3 o'clock, a sharp, hesitant knock echoed through the thin wooden door. I hid the laptop beneath the mattress and shuffled toward the entrance. I made sure to let my shoulders slump and my breathing sound labored before I turned the brass knob. Standing on the concrete walkway was my daughter. Rachel looked entirely out of place in this run-down motor lodge. She was wearing a tailored designer coat and carrying a pristine leather purse that cost more than 3 months of rent at this establishment. But it was her face that truly captured my attention. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her lower lip trembled as if she were holding back a tidal wave of grief. It was a spectacular performance. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, playing the part of the weary, heartbroken father. She walked into the dim room, her nose wrinkling slightly at the smell of stale tobacco and cheap pine cleaner, though she quickly masked her disgust with a look of profound sorrow. "Oh, Dad. Look at this place," she sobbed, turning to face me with fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I feel so terrible. Derek and I were up all night crying. We never wanted you to feel like you had to leave your own home. You have done so much for us, and I feel like the worst daughter in the world." I slowly sat down on the edge of the sagging bed, resting my hands on my knees. "It is all right, Rachel," I murmured, keeping my voice gentle and defeated. "I know you two are under a tremendous amount of stress with the house sale and your finances. I just wanted to get out of the way." She rushed over and knelt on the dirty mustard carpet right in front of me, taking my wrinkled hands in hers. "You are never in the way," she pleaded, looking up at me with those wide, innocent eyes that used to melt my heart when she was a little girl. "But we do need to get some things in order just to make sure you are taken care of while you are staying here." She stood up, unclasped her expensive purse, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She retrieved a stack of freshly printed documents and laid them gently on the small, wobbly desk. "I spoke with Dr. Evans this morning," she continued, her tone shifting to one of gentle, practical concern. "He said that with your recent memory lapses and the stress of moving, we really need to update your health insurance profiles and emergency contact authorizations. He wants to make sure that if you have an accident or a medical episode here at the motel, I have the legal ability to approve your treatments without any bureaucratic delays." I looked down at the paperwork. The bold header at the top of the first page was crystal clear. It was a comprehensive medical power of attorney. It was the exact document I had heard her discussing with Derek outside the office last night. By signing this, I would be legally declaring myself incapable of making my own medical and financial decisions, handing over total control of my life and my remaining pension to the very woman who was currently lying to my face. I felt a surge of cold fury, but I kept my expression entirely blank. "Where do you need me to sign?" I asked softly, letting out a heavy, resigned sigh. Rachel practically beamed through her fake tears, relieved that I was not going to read the fine print or put up any resistance. Just at the bottom of the last 3 pages, she said quickly, flipping to the signature lines. I patted my jacket pockets, pretending to search for a writing instrument. "Oh, I left my pen in my suitcase," I muttered. "Do not worry, I have one right here," Rachel offered, reaching back into her purse. "No," I insisted, holding up a trembling hand. "You know how I am about my lucky pen. I have used it for every important document since your mother passed. Let me just grab it." I stood up slowly and shuffled over to my small leather suitcase on the bed. I reached inside and retrieved a sleek black fountain pen. It looked perfectly ordinary, but it was a specialized tool I had acquired years ago from a forensic document examiner. The ink inside was chemically designed to bond temporarily with the paper before completely evaporating when exposed to standard room temperature air for 24 hours. Within a day, any signature made with this pen would vanish without a single trace, leaving the paper completely blank. I walked back to the desk, uncapped the pen, and signed my name with slow, deliberate strokes on all 3 pages. "Thank you, Dad." Rachel breathed, her voice dripping with artificial gratitude as she quickly gathered the papers. "This just gives me peace of mind, knowing you are safe." She shoved the documents back into the manila envelope and tucked them safely inside her designer purse. She left the purse sitting unclasped on the desk as she turned to pull me into a tight embrace. "I love you so much," she whispered against my shoulder. I hugged her back, wrapping my arms around her. As I did, I reached into the small pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a tiny black micro GPS tracking device. It was no larger than a small coin, while Rachel held me, pretending to mourn the broken relationship she had actively orchestrated. My right hand slid smoothly over her shoulder and dropped the tiny tracker straight into the open lining of her expensive purse. It settled deep into the fabric, completely hidden from view. "I love you too, Rachel." I lied, my voice steady. She finally pulled away, wiping a final fake tear from her cheek. "I will call you tomorrow to check on you," she promised, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. I stood in the center of the dingy motel room and watched her walk out into the freezing afternoon. The door clicked shut behind her. She was walking away, believing she had just stolen my future and secured her legal control over my life. She had absolutely no idea that by tomorrow morning, her precious legal document would be nothing more than blank paper, and I would be tracking every single move she and her husband made as their world began to collapse. I waited until the sound of her car engine faded completely into the distance before I moved. I locked the deadbolt again and immediately pulled my heavy laptop out from under the sagging mattress. I opened a specialized tracking application, one I had custom built years ago, to monitor corporate assets moving across international borders. A map of the greater Denver area filled the glowing screen, and a small, pulsing red dot appeared right near the highway on-ramp. The micro GPS tracker was functioning perfectly. I watched the red dot move rapidly down the interstate, heading straight back to the upscale suburb where my house sat. Rachel was going home to her husband, completely oblivious to the digital tether she had just brought into their inner sanctum. I needed to be mobile to keep a close eye on them. I used a secure prepaid phone to call a local car rental agency and arranged for a discreet, unmarked gray sedan to be dropped off at the diner next door. By the time the rental car arrived, the red dot on my screen had been stationary at the house for nearly an hour. I sat in the driver's seat of the gray sedan, the heater fighting off the afternoon chill, my laptop resting securely on the passenger seat. Suddenly, the dot began to move again. But it was not heading toward the medical clinic of her corrupt doctor, and it was not heading toward a local grocery store. It was moving fast toward the commercial financial district on the north side of the city. I merged onto the highway, staying far behind. My phone guided me through the traffic. The pulsing dot finally came to a stop in the parking lot of a sleek, modern office park, known for housing aggressive investment firms and private equity groups. I pulled into a massive retail shopping center across the street, finding a parking spot that gave me a clear, unobstructed view of the office park entrance. I reached into my small leather suitcase on the back seat and pulled out a pair of high-powered compact binoculars. I rolled my passenger window down just a crack to avoid the harsh glass glare and pressed the cold lenses to my eyes. Within moments, I spotted Derek. He was pacing nervously near the front glass entrance of the main building, clutching a thick leather briefcase tightly to his chest. He looked absolutely terrible. His expensive tailored suit was deeply wrinkled. His silk tie was hanging loose around his neck, and even from this considerable distance I could see the frantic, desperate energy radiating from his every single movement. He kept checking his expensive watch, constantly shifting his weight, and violently wiping sweat from his forehead, despite the freezing winter weather blowing around him. A few minutes later, a heavy black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb right in front of him. Two men in sharp dark suits stepped out of the vehicle. They did not look like standard suburban home buyers looking for a nice neighborhood with good schools for their children. They were fast cash property liquidators. They were the exact kind of predatory real estate investors who specifically preyed on desperate sellers facing imminent foreclosure, offering immediate cash buyouts at massive punishing discounts. Derek practically ran forward to greet them. His fake salesman smile stretched so incredibly tight across his face that it looked painful. They did not go inside to conduct business. They stood right there on the freezing sidewalk. Derek rapidly pulled out glossy printed photos of the house and began pointing aggressively to the various legal papers inside his briefcase. I could read his panicked body language perfectly from across the street. He was practically begging these men to take the deal. A beautiful property like my house in that specific upscale neighborhood should easily command its full asking price, if not significantly more, in a normal competitive market. But Derek did not have the luxury of time for a normal market. He had a first-class flight to Cabo booked for late tonight, and he had a terrifying shadow syndicate expecting $500,000 by the end of the business day. He was offering them an absolute fire sale. To get the clean liquid cash he desperately needed right this very second to save his own miserable life, he was easily slashing the asking price by at least 30%. He was throwing away hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity just to facilitate his criminal escape. The two investors looked at the papers, exchanged a profitable glance, and nodded. One man signed a thick document on the hood of the SUV. Derek slumped back against the glass wall of the office building, letting out a heavy, visible breath of pure, unadulterated relief. He shook their hands violently, grinning wildly. He truly believed he had just secured his ultimate salvation. He thought he had just legally sold the beautiful house right out from under my daughter, secured his stolen fortune, and finalized his grand escape plan to Mexico with his mistress. I lowered the binoculars and smiled a cold, completely humorless smile in the quiet isolation of my rental car. Let him celebrate his hollow victory. Let him think he won. He had absolutely no idea that the purchase agreement he had just signed with those liquidators was legally worthless. The moment those cash investors took that paperwork to the bank to attempt to transfer the deed, they would hit a massive, impenetrable wall named Apex Financial. They would discover the lien, and the entire cash deal would collapse. The financial trap I had built with Jonathan was fully set. Derek was a dead man, walking celebrating a payout he would never be allowed to touch. Before I could pull the final lever to crush his reality, I needed to make certain Rachel's extremely cruel medical scheme was dismantled completely. I calmly put the car into drive. I merged back onto the busy interstate highway, leaving the retail shopping center and Derek's pathetic celebration far behind me. My next destination was not my dingy motel room. I drove straight toward the prestigious University Medical District, situated on the eastern edge of Denver. Rachel thought she had me trapped with her corrupt friend, Dr. Evans, who was willing to backdate a fraudulent dementia diagnosis for a cut of my pension. She assumed that because I was 70 years old, society would automatically accept her narrative of my declining mental faculties. She was banking on the sad reality that the medical system often rubber stamps the concerns of a weeping, supposedly overwhelmed daughter. But I knew exactly how to dismantle a fraudulent medical claim before it ever saw the inside of a courtroom. You do not fight a corrupt doctor with angry denials. You fight a corrupt doctor with an overwhelmingly superior, completely indisputable second opinion from the highest possible authority. I pulled the gray rental car into the secure parking garage of the Colorado Institute of Cognitive Neurology. It was the premier independent psychiatric board in the entire state, specializing in complex competency evaluations for high-net-worth individuals, corporate executives, and contested estates. Their reputation was absolutely pristine, and their findings were considered the gold standard in any legal proceeding. I had called Jonathan Pierce from the car during my drive, and he had used his considerable influence to bypass the usual 3-month waiting list, securing me an emergency evaluation appointment for this very afternoon. I walked through the sliding glass doors into the immaculate, brightly lit reception area. I gave my name to the receptionist, and within minutes I was escorted into a quiet, sterile examination room by Dr. Aris Thorne, the chief of neurocognitive psychiatry. He was a sharp, serious man with piercing gray eyes who did not suffer fools or tolerate manipulation. I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk and looked him dead in the eye. I told him exactly why I was there. I explained that my daughter and her husband were attempting to falsely declare me incompetent, to seize my financial assets, and force me into a state-run facility. I handed him the blank piece of paper that Rachel believed still held my signature on the medical power of attorney. The disappearing ink had worked flawlessly. The page was entirely clean. Dr. Thorne examined the blank page, listened to my calm, measured explanation, and nodded slowly. He told me that if I wanted a legally bulletproof certificate of perfect mental health, I would have to undergo their most rigorous, exhaustive 6-hour testing protocol. I smiled and rolled up my sleeves. "Bring it on," I said. For the next 6 hours, I was subjected to a grueling battery of psychological, cognitive, and neurological examinations. They tested my short-term memory, my long-term recall, my spatial awareness, and my executive functioning. I was asked to solve complex logic puzzles, perform rapid mathematical calculations without a pen or paper, and analyze intricate visual patterns. Dr. Thorne and his team threw every standard diagnostic tool at me, and then they moved on to the advanced assessments designed to catch even the most subtle signs of cognitive decline. I did not just pass their tests, I completely destroyed them. My mind had been finely tuned by decades of forensic auditing, hunting down invisible discrepancies in massive corporate ledgers. The puzzles they placed in front of me felt like simple child play compared to untangling the offshore financial webs I used to dismantle for a living. I recalled lists of random words, backwards identified obscure historical dates, and demonstrated a flawless, comprehensive understanding of my current legal and financial standing. As the hours ticked by, the clinical detachment on Dr. Thorne's face slowly transformed into genuine professional admiration. He eventually put down his clipboard and leaned back in his chair, a rare impressed smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "Mr. Barnes," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I evaluate chief executive officers 20 years younger than you who do not possess half of your cognitive agility or mental acuity. Your executive functioning is not just normal for your age. It is exceptional by any standard metric we possess." He left the room and returned 20 minutes later, holding a thick, securely bound medical dossier. Inside was a comprehensive summary of my 6-hour evaluation, detailing my perfect scores across every single testing category. Attached to the very front was a notarized, legally binding certificate of absolute mental competency signed by Dr. Thorne and co-signed by 2 other senior psychiatrists on the medical board. It explicitly stated that I was in full possession of my faculties, entirely capable of managing my own affairs and completely devoid of any neurological impairment or dementia. This document was the ultimate shield. It was an ironclad defense that completely neutralized Rachel and her corrupt doctor. If she ever tried to present a fraudulent diagnosis to a judge or a bank, this certificate from the state's top psychiatric institute would instantly expose her fraud and likely trigger an investigation into Dr. Evans losing his medical license. I thanked the doctor carefully, placed the thick dossier into my leather briefcase, and walked out of the clinic into the cool evening air. The sun was just beginning to set over the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, painting the Denver sky in brilliant shades of orange and dark purple. I got back into my gray rental car and placed both my hands on the steering wheel, taking a deep, satisfying breath. My armor was now fully forged. I had the legal authority to destroy Derek's stolen fortune, and I had the medical proof to shatter Rachel's wicked trap. I looked at the tracking app glowing brightly on my laptop screen. The red dot was now moving toward an expensive steakhouse downtown. It was time to finally join their pathetic celebration. The Golden Steer was one of the most exclusive dining establishments in all of downtown Denver. It was the kind of place where the lighting was kept intentionally dim, the booths were upholstered in deep burgundy leather, and the air was thick with the scent of aged mahogany and perfectly seared prime rib. I parked my gray rental car across the street, sitting in the quiet shadows, watching the grand entrance through the falling snow. Inside, seated at a highly coveted circular table right in the center of the main dining room, was my family. They were accompanied by the 2 men in dark suits, the aggressive cash property liquidators Derek had met with earlier that afternoon. The table was covered in crystal wine glasses, silver platters of expensive seafood appetizers, and a thick leather folder containing the final closing documents for the sale of my house. From the outside, it looked like a standard joyous celebration of a successful and highly lucrative real estate transaction. But through the lenses of my binoculars, I could see the deeply fractured reality of the situation playing out in real time. Rachel sat next to her husband, radiating a toxic, completely unwarranted level of smugness. She had worn her favorite designer dress for the occasion, her hair perfectly styled, a diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. She was laughing loudly, tossing her head back, and holding her wineglass by the stem as she conversed with the two menacing buyers. She looked like a woman who firmly believed she had just conquered the entire world. In her twisted mind, she was the ultimate victor. She had successfully bullied her elderly father out of his $1 million home without a fight. She had tricked him into signing away his medical rights and his financial autonomy earlier that afternoon. She believed that the sale happening at this very table was going to wipe away all of their suburban debts and secure her a life of absolute luxury and comfort. She was so blinded by her own arrogance and greed that she completely failed to notice the sheer terrifying panic radiating from the man sitting directly next to her. Derek was a complete and utter wreck. He was wearing the same wrinkled suit from the parking lot, and his complexion was a sickly pale shade of gray. While Rachel casually sipped her expensive Cabernet, Derek was violently gripping his glass of water, his knuckles completely white. He was sweating profusely, tiny beads of moisture collecting on his forehead, despite the cool climate-controlled temperature of the restaurant. Every few seconds his eyes darted frantically to his heavy gold wristwatch, and then down to the screen of his cell phone resting on the white linen tablecloth. He was not celebrating. He was counting down the seconds to his own potential execution. The Shadow Syndicate had given him a strict deadline of the end of the business day to repay the $500,000 loan. It was now well past 6 o'clock in the evening. He was technically in default, and he knew that men who break legs for a living do not accept apologies or request extensions. He needed this cash sale to close right now, this very second, so he could initiate an emergency wire transfer before his first-class flight to Cabo boarded later tonight. The two property liquidators were not there to enjoy a leisurely dinner. They were hungry sharks who smelled blood in the water. They knew Derek was incredibly desperate, which was exactly why they had demanded a 30% discount on the property. The older of the two men, a burly figure with a thick neck and a cold stare, reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of legally binding contracts. He placed them directly in the center of the table, pushing aside a silver platter of oysters to make room. He tapped his thick finger against the signature line at the bottom of the top page. Derek practically lunged forward, his eyes wide and manic. He reached into his suit jacket, his hand trembling so violently that he nearly dropped his pen. He needed Rachel to sign the documents, as she was the sole legal owner of the property on paper. He quickly pulled the stack of contracts toward her, pointing aggressively to the bottom of the page, his voice tight and strained, as he urged her to finalize the deal so they could request the immediate transfer of funds to their bank account. Rachel smiled warmly at her husband, completely misinterpreting his frantic, terrified energy as excitement for their shared financial future. She gracefully set her wineglass down on the crisp white tablecloth and picked up the heavy metal pen he offered her. She smoothed down this paper, leaning forward, to sign away the very last piece of security and dignity I had ever given her. She did not hesitate. She did not express a single ounce of remorse or guilt for the father what she had banished to a freezing, miserable motel room, just to make this exact moment possible. Derek watched the tip of her pen touch the paper, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might shatter. He was seconds away from legally securing the funds he needed to abandon her, pay off the violent syndicate, and run into the arms of his waiting mistress. He thought he had navigated the storm perfectly. He thought his master plan was executed. He thought he was completely safe. I closed my laptop on the passenger seat, leaving the glowing red dot of the tracking application behind. I placed my binoculars back into their leather case. I checked the interior pocket of my tailored suit to ensure the thick, bulletproof psychiatric evaluation and the legal documents from Apex Financial were perfectly secure. I opened my rental car door and stepped out into the freezing, swirling snow. It was finally time for the main course. The snow crunched beneath my polished leather Oxfords as I carefully crossed the street toward the grand entrance of the Golden Steer. I was no longer the hunched, shivering old man wearing a moth-eaten sweater. I was wearing a bespoke, midnight blue suit, tailored to perfection, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. My posture was completely straight, my shoulders pulled back, projecting the absolute authority of a man who had spent 4 decades dominating boardrooms and crushing fraudulent empires. As I pushed through the heavy brass doors of the restaurant, the warm air and the low hum of expensive conversations washed over me. Waiting for me in the opulent lobby was Jonathan Pierce, looking equally formidable in a charcoal gray pinstripe suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. We did not need to exchange a single word. He gave me a sharp, brief nod, and we walked in perfect unison toward the private dining room located at the back of the establishment. The tall maitre d' attempted to intercept us politely, asking if we had a dinner reservation, but Jonathan simply bypassed him with a cold stare that commanded absolute obedience. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room and pushed them open without knocking. The heavy doors swung wide, hitting the padded walls with a dull, resounding thud that instantly silenced the entire table. Derek looked up from the contracts, his pen hovering just an inch above the signature line. His jaw literally dropped open, the remaining color draining rapidly from his face until he looked like a fresh corpse. He blinked rapidly, clearly, struggling to reconcile the sharp, imposing corporate predator standing in the doorway with the helpless old man he had tossed into the snow just hours prior. Rachel, however, reacted with immediate fiery indignation. She slammed her wine glass down onto the table, splashing dark red liquid onto the pristine white tablecloth. "What on earth are you doing here?" she shrieked, her voice completely shattering the refined atmosphere of the exclusive restaurant. "I told you to stay at the motel. You have absolutely no right to barge in here and humiliate us in front of our guests. Get out right now before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I stepped fully into the room, my footsteps slow and deliberate on the plush carpet. Jonathan followed right behind me, silently taking a position by my side like a loyal, heavily armed guard. "I am not going anywhere, Rachel," I said, my voice low, resonant, and completely devoid of any warmth or paternal affection. "I am here to stop a catastrophic financial mistake." Rachel let out a harsh, mocking laugh, standing up from her chair to face me. "You cannot stop anything," she sneered, her eyes flashing with cruel triumph. "You do not own that house. You do not own anything. And you certainly do not have the mental capacity to interfere with my legal affairs. In fact, I have the absolute legal authority to make every single decision for you." She snatched her expensive designer purse from the empty chair beside her and frantically dug her manicured hands inside. She pulled out the manila envelope she had brought to the motel room earlier that afternoon. She yanked out the medical power of attorney and waved it aggressively in the air toward the 2 property liquidators, trying to reassure them. "My father is suffering from severe dementia," she explained to the men, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "He is completely confused and prone to these aggressive outbursts. But as you can see, I am his legal guardian. I have the power of attorney right here, signed by his own hand just a few hours ago. He is not competent to contest this sale." I stood perfectly still, watching her with a calm, predatory gaze. "Read it, Rachel," I suggested quietly. She stopped waving the paper and shot me a venomous glare. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I simply gestured toward the document in her hand. I said, "Read it. Look at the signature line." Rachel frowned in frustration, rolling her eyes as she brought the document closer to her face to prove her point. I watched the exact moment her entire reality fractured. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She furiously flipped to the second page and then to the third. The disappearing ink had done its job flawlessly. The pages were completely, utterly blank. There was no signature. There was no date. There was absolutely nothing to bind me to her malicious scheme. "This is impossible," she whispered, her hands beginning to shake violently. "I saw you sign it. I watched you sign it with my own 2 eyes. What did you do?" While she stood there, stammering, staring at the blank paper as if it were a ghost, I unclasped my leather briefcase. I pulled out the thick, heavily bound dossier from the Colorado Institute of Cognitive Neurology and tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed right on top of their real estate contracts with a heavy, authoritative smack. "That is a comprehensive 6-hour psychiatric evaluation conducted this very afternoon by the Chief of Neurocognitive Psychiatry," I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the 2 investors. "It officially certifies that I am in perfect mental health, completely competent, and absolutely capable of managing all of my personal and financial affairs. Any claim to the contrary by my daughter or her fraudulent medical contacts is a direct act of perjury and attempted financial exploitation of a senior citizen." The 2 property liquidators were not fools. They were street-smart businessmen who survived by avoiding messy, contested legal battles. The older man with the thick neck immediately picked up the psychiatric dossier, his eyes quickly scanning the notarized signatures and the official state seals on the first page. He then looked at the blank power of attorney in Rachel's trembling hands, and finally he looked at Derek, who was now clutching his chest as if he were having a massive heart attack. The liquidator tossed the dossier back onto the table and began rapidly gathering his own contracts, shoving them aggressively into his briefcase. "We are completely done here," the man said, his voice hard and uncompromising. "We buy distressed properties. We do not buy highly contested assets wrapped in elder abuse allegations and blatant medical fraud. This deal is entirely dead. Do not ever call our firm again." "No, please wait," Derek practically screamed, leaping from his chair and reaching out to grab the man's arm. "You do not understand. I need this cash tonight. I will drop the price by another 10%. Please just sign the papers. I will handle the old man. I promise you the title is completely clear." The liquidator violently shoved Derek's hand away, giving him a look of absolute disgust. "The title is a toxic nightmare, and you are a liability," he growled. The 2 men turned their backs on the desperate, pleading real estate agent and marched straight out of the private dining room, the heavy mahogany doors swinging shut behind them. Derek collapsed back into his chair, his head falling into his hands as a pathetic, high-pitched whimper escaped his throat. His immediate cash lifeline was entirely gone. The dangerous shadow syndicate deadline was closing in incredibly fast, and he had absolutely nothing left to offer them to save his skin. He was completely and utterly trapped, with no way out. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Derek taking short, ragged breaths. He slowly lifted his head from his hands. The terrified whimpering stopped, replaced by a sudden, volatile surge of pure adrenaline and defensive rage. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot and wild, like a cornered animal, realizing it had just been completely outsmarted by its prey. He pushed his chair back so violently that it toppled over, crashing against the burgundy-patterned carpet with a heavy thud. "You crazy old fool!" Derek screamed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger directly at my chest. "Look what you just did. You just destroyed everything. That was the only way out. That was the only way to save the house and fix this entire mess." He took a threatening step toward me, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. I just stood there watching him unravel, feeling nothing but a profound sense of cold, calculated justice. I had waited for this exact moment since I first opened that black duffel bag in the freezing snow. "Get out of here," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the padded walls of the private dining room. "Get out before I throw you out myself. You have ruined my life. I am going to call security, and then I am going to call the police. You are a trespasser, Harrison. You have no right to be here, and you have absolutely no right to interfere with my private property and my business." Before Derek could take another aggressive step toward me, Jonathan Pierce stepped smoothly into the narrow space between us. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He did not posture aggressively. He simply radiated the quiet, absolute authority of a man who held the power to destroy entire corporate structures with a single stroke of a pen. "I strongly advise against calling the police or attempting to touch my client, Mr. Lawson," Jonathan said, his voice calm, measured, and dangerously cold. "If you lay a single finger on Mr. Barnes tonight, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life dealing with aggravated assault charges on top of your impending federal financial indictments." Derek stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked, his drug-addled panic momentarily cut by the sharp, authoritative tone of the lawyer standing in front of him. "Who the hell are you?" Derek demanded, though his voice had lost a significant amount of its previous volume. "Are you his attorney? What is this? You think you can just barge in here and threaten me? I am the victim here." Jonathan reached down and unclasped the brass locks on his sleek leather briefcase. He did not answer the question immediately. Instead, he reached inside and pulled out a heavy, thick manila folder. He placed it carefully on the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of where Derek was standing. He pushed it forward, the heavy cardboard sliding smoothly across the fabric until it bumped gently against Derek's crystal water glass. "I am Jonathan Pierce," he began, straightening the lapels of his jacket. "I am indeed the personal legal counsel for Mr. Harrison Barnes. However, that is not the primary reason I am standing in this room tonight. I am also the managing partner and the chief legal representative for a private equity and debt acquisition firm known as Apex Financial." Derek stared at the folder, his brow furrowing in deep, panicked confusion. "Apex Financial," he repeated the words, tasting foreign and sour on his tongue. "I do not know any Apex Financial. I have never done business with your firm. What does this have to do with me selling my house today?" "It has absolutely everything to do with your house, Mr. Lawson," Jonathan replied smoothly, his eyes locking onto Derek like a hawk. "Because as of 2 o'clock this afternoon, Apex Financial legally purchased a highly distressed asset. We acquired a specific high-yield promissory note from a private lending organization located in the Warehouse District on the outskirts of this city." The blood drained from Derek's face so fast, I thought he might actually faint right there on the carpet. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the dining table just to keep himself standing upright. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land, but no sound emerged. He knew exactly which private lending organization Jonathan was talking about. He knew exactly what promissory note had just been purchased. Jonathan tapped a perfectly manicured finger against the top of the heavy folder. "My firm now holds the exclusive, legally binding $500,000 lien on the property you just attempted to illegally sell," Jonathan stated, his voice ringing with absolute crushing finality. "You are in severe default of the original terms of that loan. The grace period has completely expired. You failed to make the required balloon payment to the original creditors, and you certainly do not have the funds to satisfy the massive debt to my firm. Therefore, as your sole legal creditor, Apex Financial is officially calling in the loan. This house is seized. It cannot be sold, it cannot be transferred, and it cannot be used as collateral ever again." "No," Derek whispered the word barely escaping his trembling lips. "No, they cannot do that. They promised me I had until the end of the day. They promised me I could pay them back with the cash from this sale. I just needed one more hour." "Criminals are rarely known for their strict adherence to verbal agreements, Mr. Lawson," Jonathan noted dryly. "They saw an opportunity for immediate clean liquidity, and they took it without a second thought. They washed their hands of you, and now you belong entirely to us." Derek stared at the heavy folder as if it were a venomous snake coiled and ready to strike. The terrifying reality of his situation was finally crashing down upon him in full force. The violent shadow syndicate was no longer his biggest problem. The true nightmare was standing right in front of him. He looked up, his terrified eyes darting from Jonathan Pierce to me. He looked at my tailored suit, my calm demeanor, and the absolute lack of surprise on my face. The realization hit him with the force of a speeding freight train. He finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. "You!" Derek gasped, his voice cracking with pure terror as he stared directly into my eyes, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are Apex Financial. You bought the debt." I did not nod. I did not smile. I simply held his gaze, letting the heavy silence confirm everything he feared. Derek let out a hollow, agonizing gasp, staggering backward until his shoulders hit the wall. He had tried to steal my future, and in response I had legally purchased his entire life. His secret illegal debt was now completely exposed in the brightly lit room. The house he had tried to sell out from under my daughter was firmly in my complete control. He had absolutely nothing left. "Wait," Michelle interrupted, her voice trembling as she looked back and forth between her devastated husband and the manila folder on the table. "What debt? What private lending organization? Derek, what are they talking about? We do not owe anyone $500,000. We only have the standard mortgage on the house. What is going on right now?" Rachel had been sitting in stunned silence since the liquidators left the room, completely incapable of processing the rapid, devastating turn of events. She had watched her perfect plan disintegrate into thin air, and now she was hearing terrifying terms, like distressed assets and shadow syndicates, being associated with her supposedly successful husband. Derek could not even look at her. He pressed his back against the padded wall of the restaurant, sliding down slowly until he was crouched on the floor, burying his face deep in his hands. He was completely broken. But I was not finished yet. The financial trap had sprung perfectly, but the most devastating truth was still waiting to be revealed. I stepped closer to the table, ready to deliver the final crushing blow. I turned my attention away from the sniveling man on the floor and focused entirely on my daughter. Rachel was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and mounting dread. She still believed she was the smartest person in the room, holding on to the dying embers of her fabricated reality. I reached into the breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the encrypted flash drive and the smooth paper of the bright pink sticky note. I pulled them both out and tossed them casually onto the table. They landed right in the center of her pristine white porcelain dinner plate. Rachel looked down at the items, her brow furrowing. "What is this?" she asked, her voice wavering, as she reached out to pick up the small piece of neon paper. "He did not kick me out of the house for you, Rachel," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a sharpened blade. "He did not throw me into the freezing snow because my presence was stressing you out or ruining the aesthetic of your beautiful home. He kicked me out so he could steal $650,000 in escrow money from his own real estate clients. He forged your signature on a fraudulent loan document to borrow $500,000 from a violent shadow syndicate using your only asset as collateral. He planned to sell the house today at a massive discount, leave you completely alone to face the police and the debt collectors, and run away to Cabo San Lucas tonight. And he was not planning to go alone." Rachel froze. The color rapidly drained from her face as my words washed over her. Her hands trembled as she held the bright pink sticky note up to the dim restaurant lighting. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the elegant blue handwriting. I watched her read the words that had shattered my heart just hours ago. "Get the house money from the old man, dump your wife, and I will see you in Cabo," signed Vanessa. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The illusion she had built for herself, the perfect marriage, the impending wealth, the absolute control she thought she had over her life and mine, shattered into a million jagged pieces. She slowly turned her head to look at Derek. He was still cowering on the floor against the padded front wall, his face buried in his hands, weeping uncontrollably. His silence was the ultimate confession. The transformation in Rachel was immediate and terrifying. The smug, confident woman who had laughed at me just 10 minutes earlier completely vanished. In her place was a woman scorned, humiliated, and utterly destroyed by the man she had chosen over her own father. A guttural, agonizing scream ripped from her throat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated primal rage. Without a single moment of hesitation, her hand darted down to the table. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the thick wooden handle of the heavy serrated steak knife resting next to her plate. Before Jonathan or I could even react, Rachel launched herself over the table, sending wine glasses and silver platters crashing to the floor in a symphony of breaking crystal and spilling food. Derek screamed in sheer terror as his wife tackled him to the carpeted floor. He threw his arms up to protect his face just as she brought the heavy steak knife slashing down. The sharp blade tore through the fabric of his suit jacket and sliced deeply into his forearm. Blood instantly blossomed across his white dress shirt. He shrieked in pain, desperately trying to push her off, but Rachel was fueled by the blinding adrenaline of absolute betrayal. She swung the knife again, screaming curses and weeping hysterically. "I will kill you!" she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly through the restaurant. "You tried to ruin me. You tried to leave me. Who is Vanessa? I will kill you both." The private dining room erupted into total, uncontrollable chaos. The heavy mahogany doors burst open, and 3 waiters rushed inside, their faces pale with shock at the horrific scene unfolding on the floor. Jonathan immediately stepped back, pulling out his cell phone to call the authorities, while the waiters bravely lunged forward to intervene. It took all 3 grown men to finally pry Rachel off her bleeding husband. They wrestled the steak knife from her frantic grip and pinned her arms behind her back. She thrashed wildly against them, sobbing and screaming Derek's name, her designer dress ruined and covered in his blood. Derek scrambled backward until he hit the far corner of the room, clutching his bleeding arm, sobbing pathetically like a beaten child. I stood in the center of the wreckage, entirely untouched by the physical violence and the emotional devastation swirling all around me. I did not feel an ounce of pity for either of them. Rachel had coldly calculated my demise to steal my pension and lock me away in a desolate facility. Derek had callously planned to steal from the innocent and abandon his wife to violent criminals. They were 2 incredibly toxic people who had finally collided with the brutal consequences of their own monstrous actions. I calmly reached down and picked up the pink sticky note that had fluttered to the carpet during the struggle. I carefully placed it back into my breast pocket. I looked at Rachel, who was still screaming and fighting against the waiters holding her back. Then I looked at Derek, bleeding and trembling, in the corner, his life completely ruined. I had promised Jonathan that I would legally dismantle Derek's entire existence and show my daughter exactly who she had bet her future on. The trap had worked flawlessly. The destruction was absolute. Now the authorities were on their way, and the final chapter of their downfall was about to begin. The distant wail of police sirens began to echo through the freezing downtown streets, cutting sharply through the tense atmosphere of the ruined dining room. The sound grew louder with every passing second, an approaching storm of justice that I had personally summoned over an hour ago. While Jonathan was finalizing the Apex financial paperwork, I had made a very detailed, anonymous phone call from my prepaid device to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. I provided them with the exact routing numbers, the name of the fraudulent shell corporation, and the physical location of the man who had systematically embezzled $650,000 from innocent homebuyers. I also made sure to mention that the suspect was considered a severe flight risk with a first-class ticket to Mexico booked for that very evening. The authorities do not take grand larceny lightly, especially when the perpetrator is actively attempting to flee international borders. The heavy brass doors at the front of the restaurant flew open. 4 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes federal agents stormed into the establishment, their badges prominently displayed. The restaurant patrons gasped, shrinking back into their leather booths as the officers marched purposefully toward the private dining room at the back. They burst through the mahogany doors, their eyes immediately scanning the chaotic scene. They saw the broken glass, the ruined food, the struggling woman being held by the waiters, and the bleeding man cowering in the corner. The lead federal agent, a tall woman with a stern face and an uncompromising demeanor, stepped forward and loudly announced her presence, demanding that everyone freeze. The waiters gratefully released Rachel, backing away with their hands raised. Rachel immediately collapsed onto the carpet, sobbing uncontrollably into her blood-stained hands. The federal agent did not pay any attention to the domestic dispute. Her eyes locked directly onto Derek. "Are you Derek Lawson?" she asked, her voice echoing with absolute authority. Derek could only nod, his entire body shaking violently as he clutched his bleeding forearm. He looked incredibly small, a pathetic shell of the arrogant real estate agent who had kicked me out of my home just hours earlier. The agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her belt and signaled for 2 uniformed officers to secure the suspect. They hauled Derek roughly to his feet, ignoring his pained whimpers as they twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp click of the handcuffs locking into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. "Derek Lawson, you are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the embezzlement of escrow funds," the agent stated clearly, reciting his Miranda rights, as the officers patted him down. Derek gasped, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of absolute terror. He looked frantically around the room, his gaze finally landing on me. He realized in that exact moment that the police were not here because of the knife attack. They were here because of the money. They knew everything. His entire criminal enterprise had been completely exposed, and he was going straight to federal prison. He struggled weakly against the grip of the officers, his bleeding arms staining their dark uniforms. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, his expression contorted in pure, desperate agony. "Wait," choked out his voice, a pathetic, rasping whisper. "Please wait. You have to tell me. I need to know. Who is behind it? Who is the head of Apex Financial? How did they find out about the syndicate?" I slowly walked across the carpeted floor, stepping carefully over the broken wine glasses and the spilled food. I stopped just a few inches away from where the officers were holding him. I looked deep into his terrified, bloodshot eyes. He was begging for an answer, desperate to understand the invisible force that had so completely annihilated his life. I leaned in close, bringing my face right next to his ear, ensuring that my voice was meant for him and him alone. "Thank you for the trash bag," I whispered. I stepped back and watched the exact second his brain processed those 6 simple words. His eyes widened to an impossible degree. His jaw dropped, and a low guttural moan escaped his throat. The realization hit him with the devastating force of an atomic bomb. Apex Financial was not some faceless corporate entity. It was the frail, elderly father-in-law he had abused, belittled, and thrown out into the snow. The trash bag he had carelessly instructed his wife to throw at me contained his entire stolen fortune and the blueprint to his destruction. By treating me like garbage, he had handed me the exact weapons I needed to buy his debt, seize his property, and orchestrate his ultimate downfall. A fresh wave of sobbing overtook him. He collapsed forward, his knees buckling under the crushing weight of his stupidity. The officers had to drag him out of the room. He wept loudly, a broken, defeated man being hauled away to face decades behind bars. Rachel remained on the floor, staring blankly at the wall, completely paralyzed by the horrific reality of the monster she had married and the father she had betrayed. Jonathan stood by the door, closing his leather briefcase with a quiet, satisfying click. He gave me a respectful nod, acknowledging the perfection of the trap we had set. The police sirens outside began to wail once again, signaling the departure of Derek Lawson from the civilized world. I stood in the quiet aftermath of the storm, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored suit, feeling the heavy burden of the past 3 years lift from my shoulders. The truth was out, the villain was in chains, and justice had been served cold. I took a deep breath, savoring the silence that settled over the ruined dining room. I had reclaimed my dignity and protected my future against those who sought to destroy me. 6 weeks passed since that night at the Golden Steer. The winter snows of Denver began to melt, giving way to crisp signs of spring. My life had completely transformed. I no longer lived in a cramped motel room on the edge of the highway. I moved into a sprawling luxury condominium on the top floor of a secure modern high-rise right in the bustling heart of downtown. The windows offered a breathtaking view of the majestic Rocky Mountains. I was finally enjoying the peaceful retirement that my late wife Diane had always envisioned for me. The world I left behind, however, was in absolute ruins. Derek was currently sitting in a federal detention center denied bail due to his status as a severe flight risk. The federal prosecutors meticulously uncovered every single one of his shell companies and fraudulent wire transfers. He was facing a multitude of charges from grand larceny to wire fraud, carrying a combined maximum sentence of over 30 years in federal prison. His stolen funds had been completely seized, leaving him entirely at the mercy of an overworked public defender. Rachel did not fare much better. When Apex Financial formally foreclosed on the million-dollar property, she was legally evicted. She had no savings, no assets, and no professional income to fall back on. To make matters substantially worse, the innocent home buyers that Derek had defrauded filed massive civil lawsuits against her, arguing she was a willing beneficiary of his criminal enterprise. Her bank accounts were completely frozen pending the investigation. Her pristine credit score was obliterated. The arrogant woman who sipped expensive wine was now entirely homeless, forced to live out of her compact sedan in the dark corners of public parking lots. I knew all of this because my lawyer kept me thoroughly updated on the legal proceedings. But I had not actually seen my daughter since the night she attacked her husband. That streak ended on a brisk Tuesday morning. I walked out of the gleaming glass lobby of my building, intending to take a quiet stroll to my favorite local coffee shop. As I stepped onto the pristine sidewalk, a figure emerged from the shadows near the parking garage entrance. It was Rachel. The transformation was shocking. Her hair was tangled and unwashed. Her clothes were heavily wrinkled and stained. She looked exhausted, shivering in a thin jacket that was not nearly warm enough for the morning chill. The moment she saw me, her eyes filled with desperate, frantic tears. She rushed forward, closing the distance between us before the building security guard could even react. "Dad," she sobbed, her voice a hollow, broken rasp. "Dad, please wait. Please talk to me." I stopped walking, but I did not reach out to comfort her. I stood perfectly still, looking at her with the same clinical detachment I used to examine fraudulent spreadsheets. She completely collapsed onto the cold, concrete pavement, falling to her knees right in front of me. She reached out with trembling hands, clutching the fabric of my tailored trousers. "I am so sorry," she wept, her tears leaving wet tracks down her dirty cheeks. "I was so wrong about everything. Derek manipulated me. He lied to me. I had no idea he was stealing money or taking out illegal loans. I have lost absolutely everything, Dad. I am sleeping in my car. I have nothing to eat. Please, you have to help me. You are my father. You are my only family left. Please give me a second chance. I will do anything. I will take care of you. Just please do not leave me like this." I looked down at the weeping woman kneeling at my feet. A few years ago, the sight of my daughter crying would have shattered my heart into a million pieces. I would have moved heaven and earth to fix her problems. But the man who loved her died the exact moment she threw a black duffel bag at his chest and told him to walk out into a freezing blizzard. I gently, but firmly, pulled my leg back, forcing her to release her desperate grip on my trousers. I looked down at her with absolute cold clarity. "You did not care about family when you tried to lock me in an asylum to steal my pension," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You did not care about family when you threw me out of the house I bought for you simply because my presence was an inconvenience to your greed. You made your choice, Rachel. You threw me out like trash. Now you can enjoy your own garbage." I turned my back on her and walked away. I did not look over my shoulder. I ignored the agonizing screams and the desperate pleas echoing down the sidewalk behind me. I chose my own dignity, my peace, and my self-respect over the toxic, poisonous bonds of blood. Later that evening, I stood on the expansive balcony of my condominium, the city lights of Denver glittering brightly below me. I held a heavy crystal glass filled with expensive, aged bourbon. The legal sale of the foreclosed house had been finalized earlier that week. After Jonathan took his fees, a massive sum remained. I did not keep a single penny. I transferred the entire balance to a charity dedicated to providing free legal aid to elderly individuals who suffered financial abuse by their family members. I took a slow sip of the warm bourbon. Society conditions us to believe family is everything. But blood is not a binding contract for abuse. Respect is earned, not owed. I learned you are never too old to fight back and build a sanctuary out of betrayal. Thank you for listening. If it helped you find courage, subscribe and comment where you are watching from. Stay strong, protect your heart, and I will see you next time, with love and respect.